Hi, everybody. Let's get started. This is my first assignment for my new course, NU 610, Theories, Principles, and Methods of Education. The name of this project is Levels of Nursing Education. I'm comparing the Nurse Practice Acts of Maine and Kansas, and then giving my own journey. So, why Nurse Practice Acts in Maine and Kansas? I live in Kansas, and I might be moving to Maine. It's that simple. When comparing the Nurse Practice Acts, NPA, of Kansas and Maine, it became evident that Kansas uses transparent and prescriptive delineations of its requirements, while Maine uses broad strokes to establish statutory approval of nursing programs, but often remands the details to the Maine Board of Nursing, MBON. While the two states approach the statutory aspect governing their NPA differently, the National Council Licensure Examination, NCLEX, pass rates of Kansas are higher than those of Maine, scoring 93.5% and 92% respectively. That's from Carleton, 2025. Topic: Curriculum and educational requirements for practical nurses, vocational nurses, PN, VN, and registered nurses in the Maine Nurse Practice Act, MNPA. The Maine legislature has adopted a minimal statutory approach to defining the requirements for its practical nurse and vocational nurse programs. All that is required is completion of an approved practical nursing program. There is a statute that defines a requirement of at least 1 year of study for a student to transfer between approved schools of nursing. Maine does not, however, define curriculum, remediation, clinical hour requirements, or reentry requirements. That is from Maine Legislature 2025. Instead, Maine voters have decided to let the MBON create and publish those rules. As for educational requirements, the MNPA only defines successful completion of a board-approved professional, which is RN, or practical, PN program, and a passing score on the licensure exam. Since the MNPA does not identify educational nor curricular requirements, instead choosing to leave that to the MBON, here is their verbiage. Quote, these include, but are not restricted to, the following content areas. 1. Anatomy, physiology, chemistry, microbiology, and pathophysiology. 2. Sociology, psychology, communications, growth and development, interpersonal relationships, group dynamics, cultural diversity, and humanities. 3. Legal, ethical, and professional considerations that influence nursing. And 4. Pharmacotherapeutics, medication administration, nutrition, and diet therapy. In addition to these subjects, the MBON requires curriculum to be clearly written and accessible, periodically reviewed by faculty, and consistent with the current nursing standards and mission goals of the quote-unquote governing organization. That whole quote is from Maine Legislature 2025, page 17. Now let's talk about the Kansas Nurse Practice Act, KNPA. In Kansas, state statute demands that nursing programs maintain basic professional, RN, or practical, PN curricula. Unlike that of Maine, the Kansas State Board of Nursing, KBON, in 2022, explicitly prescribes curricular and educational requirements in its KNPA. Kansas requires coursework in the biological, physical, and behavioral sciences, nursing fundamentals, pharmacology, nursing process, clinical decision-making, and supervised clinical practice across the lifespan and various settings. Other elements defined are minimum clinical requirements, integration of theory and practice, and simulation standards of use. Like that of Maine, the KNPA also requires successful completion of the RN or PN programs and a passing score on the licensure exam. Additionally, the KNPA defines requirements for didactic and clinical settings, re-entry after lapse, remedial education, foreign educated nurses, and requirements for LPNs trained in the military. In conclusion, Kansas and Maine have taken vastly different approaches to designing the Nurse Practice Act. Kansas has very explicitly defined requirements for education and curriculum. Conversely, Maine has taken a less statutory tack by placing the power to set requirements largely with the MBON. The Maine approach leaves the nursing board with more authority to self-govern than that of Kansas. Despite the differing approaches, Kansas outperforms Maine by a small margin in NCLEX pass rates. Many subsequent questions arise from the pass rates. Which state has the more successful workforce based on patient outcomes? Which state has happier nurses? More research on these topics is needed. For my own personal pathway to nursing, my personal journey to becoming a nurse was circumstantial and a bit clumsy. I was recommended by a registered nurse to get into nursing during a casual conversation that we held during a lesson where I was teaching her how to dance the waltz. She had mentioned something about prerequisites as a first step. Without seeking professional guidance, I enrolled in community college with the help of Pell Grants. And after several semesters and a few unnecessary courses, I was advised by financial aid to complete my Associate's in Arts degree, AA, or start paying out of pocket. No more Pell Grants. After earning my AA, I was accepted to St. Luke's College of Health and Nurse Sciences, Baccalaureate Program, BSN. In 2 years, I earned my BSN and gave an enormous sigh of relief. I told myself I would never put myself through such rigorous academia again. Well, 9 years into my career, a friend of mine invited me to give a guest lecture to her third semester BSN students, and that Sentinel event led to my enrollment in the Masters of Nurse Educator program at Baker University. Once I graduate in May of 2027, I plan to focus on my teaching career and then possibly pursue a terminal degree in education. I will leave my references in a Word document underneath this video link. Thank you for watching.